another thought-provoking episode of Means of Grace. Today, we're diving into the life and legacy of one of the most influential figures in Christianity. That's right, we're talking about John Wesley today, and how his theology, his practices, and leadership changed the course of American Christianity. If you don't know who I am, I'm Jesse Ennis. I am Associate Pastor at St. Stephen UMC, Director of Communication for the Leadership Development Team. And joining me today, as always, are my two esteemed co-hosts, Dr. J, Dr. Jonathan LeMaster-Smith, our expert on church polity, who's going to guide us today through Wesley's theology, the birth of Methodism, and its impact across America. And John Yeager, the Reverend John Yeager, in the house, pastor at Calvary United Methodist Church in Charlotte. He's going to help us to reflect on the world that John Wesley was faced with during his life. So today we're just going to hop right in, explore Wesley's early life, his time in America, and how his legacy continues to shape the American Christian landscape. John, let's start with Wesley's journey today. How did that all begin?
Thank you, Jesse. So my question first is, when you meet someone for the first time, what do they ask about you first, Jonathan?
Well, out in the country churches, they'll ask the question, who are you kin to?
There you go. That's right. Who are you kin to? They want to know what you're about. And the first thing they want to know is your history. They want to know who your parents were. How were they raised? Because your parents have the most impact on you. So that's not just a crazy thing we ask in the South. It's something serious. They want to know what you're made of. They want to know who you are. So in that vein, really quick, who are the parents of John Wesley? Well, Samuel Wesley was born in 1662, and he grew up in the aftermath of the English Civil War. His childhood was right there at the end, so he had war in his childhood. And it saw the monarchy get overthrown, and the king was executed. And Oliver Cromwell's Puritan Commonwealth was established. So it was a crazy time just to be alive, let alone be in ministry. But the restoration of the monarchy in 1660 with Charles II brought a time of intense political maneuvering, and people started shifting allegiances. The Church of England was reestablished as the state church, and dissenters, those who refused to conform to the practices, faced persecution or worse. And wouldn't you know it, Samuel's father, John, was a notorious nonconformist minister, part of a broad coalition of nonconformist English pastors. The elder Wesley, like a lot of nonconformists, suffered financially because of those truths. The elder Wesley, he was part of a group labeled dissenters under the Clarendon Code, a series of legal statutes that got passed against people who didn't conform. So Samuel grew up in a world where his family's beliefs set them apart from everybody else. But Samuel would take a different path from his father. At 19, Samuel shocked his non-dissenting parents by going and conforming to the Church of England. In 1683, he enrolled at Exeter College in Oxford, aligning himself with the Anglican Church. And this shift was as much political as it was religious. The Church of England was a symbol of order in a crazy post-Civil War world. But wouldn't you know, after the Glorious Revolution in 1688, because the English couldn't go very long without having a revolution back in those days, which saw James II deposed, this revolution secured Protestant rule in England. But Samuel's career as an Anglican clergyman wasn't easy. Despite his efforts to align with the church, he had a lot of financial difficulties too, stemming from his childhood. Susanna, John Wesley's mother, was no less a product of those political maneuverings. Born in 1669, Susanna came from an even stricter nonconformist background. Her father, Dr. Samuel Ainsley, was a prominent Puritan clergyman, staunch dissenter. In fact, the Ainsleys were a part of the Puritan movement, which eventually sailed over to the New World. But like her husband, Susanna's early life was shaped by religious conflicts. The Ainsleys had nonconformist convictions. Susanna chose a different path. At 13, she decided to align with the Church of England. Can you believe that? For Susanna, joining the Anglican Church meant embracing the idea of a national church. But here's the catch. She was an exceptionally educated woman for joining this mainstream denomination. Her father's library gave her ample opportunities to learn and grow. And, she taught her son a couple things too. Susanna married Samuel Wesley in 1688, the same year as the Glorious Revolution. What a way to never forget your anniversary. Their union came at a time when the political landscape of England was unsure. And so they decided, let's have a family. Despite their shared convictions, though, Samuel and Susanna had a marriage that was marked by a lot of tension. Samuel was often away, and Susanna had a lot of those nonconformist attitudes go with her. I think perhaps it was that mix that created the Methodist movement. So my question here is this. Do our backgrounds, like John Wesley's, how much do they shape how we feel about our religion and what we practice and what we teach and how we change our views about things, right? And does John's background, his parents' background, does it maybe soften some of his stances on the American Revolution? When we know how much history he had in violence and civil war, can you imagine somebody that would be more against it? So as we learn and we grow more, learn about John Wesley during this podcast, I hope we ask some of those questions about ourselves, the people we love and care for, or the people we don't love and care for so much. Where did they get it from? So here's the question.
Go for it.
How did these early experiences for John Wesley later shape his broader vision for Methodism, especially in the United States of America?
That's a good question. I guess I would say kind of along the lines of what you said, like, yeah, it probably had an impact on him, considering the fact that the way that he responded to what was happening in America. I think also too, just the ways that you see him live out his life and his ministry have a lot of direct ties towards Samuel and Susanna, not just their choices in being a part of the Anglican Church, but also some of the backgrounds from, having family members, having their parents. John Wesley has grandparents who are of different denominational histories as well. And so I think we see that a lot in, for instance, John's focus on the means of grace, if you will, coming from a more pietist, if you will, background, but also the ways that John is leading this ministry that is in a lot of ways a reformation of the Anglican Church, seeing what I'm assuming his grandparents saw, and I'm sure his parents saw as well, even though they did choose the Anglican Church, seeing some of those points of contention, reasons why people would consider dissenting, you know what I mean? And looking at that, and instead of saying, like, we're going to get out of Dodge, saying we are going to be a part of a positive change that the church so desperately needs, because the church, the Anglican Church in and of itself, had gone through all of these back and forth. It was basically, the Anglican Church basically reflected whatever king was reigning, king or queen that was reigning at the time. And so the Anglican Church in and of itself was all over the place. And so yeah, I think all of that played into who John eventually came to be and the decisions that he made.
Anglicanism with a little edge to it.
Yeah.
It's interesting that it came in, these nonconformists were invited back into the faith after some of these revolutions, and that changed the whole faith, inviting them back into the faith again after being, outside the faith for a while, and how relevant to us today, right? People coming and going now from denominations, and are we inviting them back in and forth? What does that mean? A lot of hard questions. Hard questions. Jonathan.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about John Wesley. See, if y'all don't know, Jonathan just got back from England. He went to Oxford. He was there.
He was walking in
I
the
did,
man's
and
footsteps.
yes, it's a really humbling experience. At time of recording, it's been about a month since I've been back, so it's still kind of fresh on my mind and sort of sitting with that experience of being able to be in Oxford, to worship in the cathedral where he was ordained, to step foot in his prayer room in his last house, to see his grave, to see his brother's grave, his mother's grave, all of that sort of experience, and that sense of understanding that this man was trying desperately to do the work of spreading the gospel in ways that made sense to the people of England, particularly the working class, the poor, in a time where not only was it going through revolutions in terms of politics and religion, but the Industrial Revolution was at play here in the 1700s. So you see a dramatic upheaval in social life, because one of the main reasons that we deal with the requirements and discussions around church membership at the time is that the way that you got social services is that you were born into a church and you stayed in that church your whole life. As part of that, the church kept the records in a great deal. So you were born into a church. If you needed social services, you went back to that particular local parish. But in a time of great social upheaval, people are moving around this nation to places of industry, factories, mines, the ports, as new materials are coming in from all of the various colonies and explorations that are happening around there. So trying to find this sense of what does it mean that we are in a society that is far more fluid than it was. We're dealing with this today, even in the U.S. We're trying to figure out how do we continue to do things in a world that is changing. We are moving, maybe moving from an industrial age into a post-industrial, de-industrial, digital, whatever you want to call it.
Whatever you want to call it. We're definitely changing, is the point.
And having to experience that reality, even in our local churches, is wild, because I remember I have members of my church that I worked at the same company for 40 years and retired. I'm like, well, I've had 17 jobs since I was 17. And it's that sort of reality of trying to figure out what that means in this world and how to find that relationship. I don't think I've had 17. I may actually have now.
I for sure have in my life.
As part of that reality. So back to John Wesley, though, I think he is someone who's trying to, in a changing world, find a way for the gospel to be relevant and for the value of the gospel not just to be salvation, but to be a transformed world.
Which I think he got a little from his nonconformist, as he's trying to the high church stuff. He right. That was some of the stuff that they had the problem with, was some of the high church stuff, and honestly, it was some of the remnants of Catholicism, right? And
well, so the high church stuff, and I got the chance to step into the last Anglican church that would let John Wesley preach in it, because, like his nonconformist parents, he got shut out of churches because he was preaching a gospel that was uncomfortable.
Yeah.
We may think of it as common today, but it was an uncomfortable gospel to be preaching, the expectation of action in the world and community. Basically he's just teaching Jesus's gospel for that particular time and place, and Jesus's gospel should make us uncomfortable in a lot of ways.
What was also uncomfortable was who he was focusing on teaching it to.
Yes, the poor, the working class. He's advocating for ending slavery, for workers' rights, for education for the poor.
But for like small groups, right? For people to make their own little groups. That's
that reality. Yeah, so, he was going around spreading the gospel. At first, he was willing to preach inside churches, and the reality is he started getting shut out of churches, so he starts preaching in fields, whether it's on top of his father's grave or in the bottom of a mine that's set up like an amphitheater, so his voice will project, or in a factory. Wherever he is welcomed in, he's going to spread that gospel, and people are going to start hanging around and asking him questions afterwards, like, how can I go further with this? Jesus had the same thing as part of that. And that look at working at how does he do the work? He creates small groups based on the society model that already existed. He's not inventing a lot of new stuff. He is just utilizing what is already available for the task at hand. And that feels like something we can definitely learn from him. He called these sort of prudential means of grace, that there is a need and we can use what we have and what we know to make it work in the time and flex to the needs of the people as part of that, and the needs of the gospel.
I'm glad you mentioned that too, because especially when we talk about him preaching in the fields, like, it wasn't that he was just like doing whatever was popular at the time. Like he had moments of real reflection. Like he didn't just jump into preaching in the fields. Like when I believe it was George Whitfield, correct me if I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm probably going to write this in a paper at some point. So
Whitfield is, yes.
this is my first draft for the Board of Ordained Ministry. But no, like George Whitfield starts this street preaching, and at first he's like, dude, no way, like what are you what are you doing? But after having conversations with George Whitfield and really wrestling with it, he came to the conclusion that this is something that's going to edify the people. And so he did, and he became, what I understand, a lot more popular than George Whitfield at doing this street preaching as well. And so yeah, I think one of our kind of Wesleyan
mainly
roots,
because you're on Wesley's side. They would argue back and forth. They would argue back and forth about who had the biggest crowds and those sort of things. I mean, Whitfield,
we don't hear those arguments
Wesley
today.
was the more successful one, at least.
Yeah, but all that to say, like, we have to reclaim that spirit of being the type of folks who are willing to try something new, willing to hear from other people's perspectives and the practices that other people are taking part in, and not just adopt things, but adapt them to ways that they can work well to edify the people in our communities as well.
And that's a reality. The language that Wesley will use was he's submitting to be more vile. That he was willing to go into the places that priests and preachers didn't go. And when we say street preaching, we literally mean the same kind of street preaching you might see today.
Yeah,
as part of that.
Yep.
Yeah,
and that,
absolutely.
For better or worse.
And I love how he kept the edge on it, because no matter what they would say, like you're going there or something, and he would say, "Yeah, I am going to the vile place. Why aren't you there?" He never said, "Oh, but that's not vile. There are people." He would just go, "No, that's where you're supposed to go."
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
And the challenge was always there, right back in his face. I can only imagine he got that from his mother. That immediate retort, right, talk back right in their face. Like, no, how about you look at it this way?
And even in notes on his preaching, when people would try to interrupt his sermons, he would quickly work what they said into his sermon as part of it. He was a fabulous extemporaneous preacher.
That's awesome.
Now, people will say that Whitfield was by far the better preacher.
He's had a bigger voice. Booming.
He was a trained actor too, so that was part of it. There was the rumor that he could make a woman faint by just saying Mesopotamia. So
that's my favorite fact that might be going in a sermon. And all you preachers out there, these are all free sermon notes. Use them at your leisure.
Yes, exactly. I mean, the reality is that Wesley is successful not mainly because of his preaching, but his ability of where he was willing to go and how he was willing to set up networks of people, whether that be networks of individuals in small groups, class meetings, band meetings, networks of pastors in circuits, as part of that, to be able to resource people. I mean, he's one of the first ones creating these essentially little free libraries that you see sitting around everywhere. He puts one in every one of his meeting houses for his pastors and his members to be able to get a selection of solidly Christian books. Like, and by Christian, we don't mean just Christian fiction. Augustine is in there. Thomas à Kempis is in there.
Oh, yeah.
All of these prayer books and worship resources and all of these sort of things are present as part of this, and for people to go get into and learn as part of that, all printed affordably. Again,
I like that. So let's discuss Wesley's emphasis on small group discipleship and the establishment of the the Methodist societies, the classes, and the bands. We see these as like a way to foster personal holiness and social accountability. Can we talk about that a little bit more?
Sure. So Wesley is doing the thing where he's adapting something from a previous existence. Societies existed the entire time for all over the place in English world and in the world in general. They were essentially parachurch organizations, and not just church organizations, but how we have them today. We have various things like the Masons and the Elks Lodge and those sort of things. But for the Christian ones that existed, there were still some that exist today. The Society for the Promotion of Christian Knowledge is one of them in England, is now a publishing house and educational program as part of that. But yeah, so he was utilizing that model to create societies that would help people grow in their faith, not to separate from them from their church, but to enhance their spiritual and religious experiences, as well as to give them accountability partners to help them both grow in their faith, but also grow in their connection to their community and their ability to help their community and benefit from the community as well, especially because Wesley believed that we were to help each other and to grow as part of that. So these little societies began with, of course, just gathering to hold one another accountable, but grow into these social movements around a community.
And he's tapping into something, as he always did beautifully, something old, right? He's making something old new, like these small groups. I mean, he's tapping into some of the very original things that the Bible's about, how to live with each other. That's, I mean, when you can get very foundational, but you can break it down into a lot of simple ways. And one of them is how we live with each other while God's watching. I mean, and every so often you get an age or a generation that comes along that tries to upset it, not in a bad way, but tries to, be like, hey, I don't think the way we've been doing this for the last 100, 200 years is right. Mm-hmm. I think there's a new way to do this.
Yes.
I think we should be reflecting on how to better live with each other. That's not just something we should overlook. In fact, scriptures tell us that that's foundational, right? Is how do I relate to you? Mm-hmm. How do you relate to me? And what does that mean to our relationship to God?
Yeah.
And John was just hammering on that this whole time. And it was funny as he's hammering this away sometimes at clergy and priests who are literally up in their pulpits. I mean, Jonathan, you were over there. A lot of those pulpits, you got to climb like a staircase.
Oh, even Johnston's in his chapel was originally like 12 feet tall.
Oh, yeah.
And they had another person sitting below him and another person sitting below them in terms of like there were different readers at different levels.
Yeah. Wow. So a lot of times he's literally, going, why don't you come down here? Because this is where we're living with each other. And he would nail that. And so talking about his focus kind of on education and with the Enlightenment and everything. So I wear a clergy tab. And the first collars were worn primarily by clergy. These were in preaching bands. In about the mid-17th century through John Wesley. He would wear one, the academic side, right, Jonathan? He had this kind of more academic leaning, and so did some of the other clergy around that time. So they wore an academic robe, and they'd wear a tab. Now, at the time, Catholic priests were wearing the cassock. They were wearing a full. And then it slowly evolved over time, and clergy, obviously, in Catholicism, kept the tab, and somehow we lost, as Protestants, the clergy tab. But let me tell you, it is coming back. I have seen it at General Conference. I have seen it annual conference. I see it more and more. So go ahead. I love it. Just be who you are at all times.
Whereas I tend to be anti the clergy tab. One, I'm not clergy, so I'm not wearing one anyway. Remember, I'm a lay person.
One, I've got no dog in this fight.
But I think it's also that we need to be with the people and not set ourselves separate from the people in certain places as part of that. It's that sort of reality. But I mean, that's something I want to go back to with Wesley, I think, in terms of his sort of setting up his conference systems and things like that, to something that was just in the past week at time of recording announced about the future of the denomination itself.
Ooh.
So John Wesley, of course, loved him some conferences. Holy conferencing was one of his ordinances, and he brought the first annual conference to ever happen was in 1744, and they came together to discuss what to teach, how to teach, and what to do. There was very little voting on polity and structures of things. There was some discussion around that, but it was mostly like, what should we do? How should we be Methodist in the world that we are in today? How do we promote the gospel, particularly sanctification, as something that is rich and new? And these discussions of theology and practice came into place. And I want to say this is something that I think our denomination is making an interesting turn towards. Just in the past week, there was an announcement that instead of what we thought might be a called 2026 General Conference, we're going to have a called leadership gathering.
I saw that. Interesting.
Yeah, so that is going to be, there's a whole discussion on the social media about what this is going to look like, but essentially there'll be representatives from each annual conference, plus every bishop, because they need a seat as part of that. And
you need a bench of bishops.
A bench of bishops, yes.
You need a bench of bishops.
We know that it's going to be probably in April or May of 2026, and we don't know where yet. Of course, logistics will be tied down eventually.
Charlotte! No, don't do that. Right there.
I know that at least your wife would not be happy.
That's
with
right. We're still tired from the
in
last
Charlotte.
one. Go meet somewhere else.
Still tired from the last. No, so it's going to be actually more like the original annual conference in a lot of ways.
Oh.
It seems to be a call to discuss what to teach, how to teach, and what to do as a denomination for the future.
Well, that sounds
Instead
fun.
of us bringing legislation to argue about, we're coming with hopes and ideas from around the world. Remember, we are truly a global denomination as part of that. And so we need to bring people from all over the place to begin to discuss what is the future for what spreading the gospel is going to look like in the 21st century.
I love this. I didn't think because as y'all know, news about this, whether we were going to meet again or not meet again, the Book of Discipline, and we got rules, and whether we were going to squeeze another this is a beautiful solution. Mm-hmm. That I had not thought of. So,
and now some people will say, well, they can't make any decisions. I'm like, well, yeah, but they can make actionable items, suggestions for missions forward, create working groups to write new legislation, or just to create new programs. We don't need legislation. We don't need to legislate the gospel.
We get ourselves in trouble when we do.
We don't need to legislate the gospel. We just need ideas to come forward and plans to be made and directions to be taken as part of that. I mean, the reality is, as we think about it, we probably should be looking at the whole historical trajectory of Methodism to say, what can we adapt for today?
Absolutely. This is
as part of that.
Great news.
Yes, I think it's great news, and I think it is leading into our Methodist roots of coming together, not simply to vote on things, but to actually pray and discern the future for our denomination without coming with this goal of winning and losing. And I think that's what General Conference can feel like sometimes, is winning and losing when we debate policy and people's who can be ordained, who can be married, those sort of things. Why don't we come and plan for how we're going to spread the gospel and do the work of justice and mission in the world? And that feels richer and even more Methodist to me in a lot of ways. But if we want to talk about the American Methodism, that's a whole different thing.
Well, let's get into that whole different thing.
Let's get into
Oh, no.
How did Wesley's theology influence the practical piety on American Christianity? What happened there?
Well, so we know that John Wesley spent a little bit of time in Savannah. He made his experience in the Americas dramatically impacted how he built Methodism in a lot of ways, although he would consider his time in Savannah just an utter failure in terms of that, both, personally and ministry-wise.
Oh, in every way, yeah. And it's sick
in every way
home.
Yeah, he basically chased out of town with pitchforks. It's great. It's great. It's a wild time he's experienced, but it really ended up leading to him having a transformative experience.
There you go. It gives you depth. That's right. We would not have had the John Wesley we have without that.
Yeah.
But getting kicked out of town builds character, I guess.
100%.
Is the moral of the story.
For why.
Yeah. I will say the Methodism had made its way to the Americas through sort of circuit preachers and sort of rogue preachers who I like the idea of Methodism. Let's go to the Americas and start stuff.
Hey, rogue preacher.
There was an early Methodist conference that did take place where they did pledge allegiance to John Wesley as their founder and leader.
Oops.
But this was not the famous Christmas conference we talk about, which has its own different flavor that will come into play. So they did like John Wesley there, but the reason, of course, John Wesley decides to start an American church is because we had a war here against his country.
Oh.
And a war for independence and revolution and such as part of that. And then, of course, we chased a lot of the Anglican priests out of there because, by default, the Anglican Church is loyal to the king because the king is the head of the church, or queen, but it was a king at the time.
It is called the Church of England, so.
Yes, exactly. So, and John Wesley did go ask the bishops to say, hey, will you send clergy back who are willing to work with these people? And the bishop's like, I don't want them to die.
Absolutely not.
So John Wesley takes it upon himself to essentially commission, consecrate. He doesn't want to use the word ordain or...
Well, he had to because after the war, the English were a little sour.
Yeah. So
they took it upon himself. Continue.
But what he does is creates two superintendents to send over there. He uses the word superintendent intentionally because he's not trying to create bishops so much as superintendents of a movement as part of that. And he sends a Church of England priest, Thomas Coke, who is willing to go because of his passion for missions. And I think he eventually gets called the missional flea or something like that because he's bouncing around different countries doing missional work and connection with people. And then Francis Asbury, who was a Methodist lay preacher, more like me, as part of that. I'm trying to raise my hand, but it's not in the shot. Okay, we have video. So if you're listening to us on audio only, we do have a video podcast.
Jonathan's
on
waving
YouTube.
his hand up and down.
Yeah.
Exactly. I'm also wearing a Hawaiian shirt that contrasts against Jesse and John's different colors of blues. So we are. He essentially consecrates what would become the bishops of the Methodist Church in North America, and sends them over to start a church to bring together the loyal Methodist preachers that are there to found the church. Now, John Wesley is encouraging people to continue to practice society meetings, class meetings, those sort of things. In fact, a former church member just found evidence of a road to the meeting house in the county that I live in. I served a church on the other side of the county, and it turns out he thought it might have been to the Quaker Meadows Presbyterian Church, but what it was to the McDowell Meeting House that would eventually become the Oak Hill United Methodist.
Nice.
So it was really neat to find that. Sorry, that was my little digression from the little piece of history that I know from my local community. So back to John Wesley. He is sending them there to essentially establish a church that he would be the head of in a lot of ways. He has created their book of common prayer, which is the Sunday service for Methodists in North America, which is on its way, but it never seems to get there for a while. And when they formed this church, they decide maybe we don't want another king, because it feels like John Wesley setting himself up sort of in a kingly state, and so they take some matters into their own hands around creating their own church. That's a whole discussion.
A whole other podcast.
But we're going to focus
John Wesley's life is complicated.
There is still a move to pull in that idea of piety and connection and mission into this. And Methodism, the value of this Methodism is what helps fuel the Second Great Awakening, which helps to create some of the holiness and even eventually the Pentecostal movement in the second half of the 19th century.
The sparks flew.
This personal and communal piety, this say of working together, holding one another accountable, promoting not just salvation but sanctification, leads to the holiness movement, which has rooted in it some of the Methodist tradition of anti-slavery movements, as well as empowering women in ministry.
Focusing on slight focus more on this life.
Yes, the focus on it is not just, salvation is important and engaging in eternal life is important, but it starts now.
That's right.
And we need to live our lives as if we are building the kingdom where we are. So spreading the gospel, but also spreading hope through feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, creating schools and hospitals. That's why there are so many Methodist schools, so many Methodist hospitals and clinics, all of these different things as part of that, because we were trying to transform not just the country, but the continent is what we called it, to reform the continent as part of that. And we still have that legacy today that we carry with us.
Yeah, we do.
Love it.
So we need to get edgier.
Edgier, but also edgier in a way that doesn't, how to say this nicely, edgier that doesn't rely on structures. Oh no,
it has the structures but doesn't rely on them, right? I mean, it's kind of those things, right? Yeah, where you don't. There's this. I agree. Yeah,
I think, or at least the structures that we have held so dearly.
Right.
Some of them need to stay. Maybe they need to be transformed.
They do. They need to change and adapt over time. And
I think maybe fresh expressions is some of that, but I think also just doing this work of saying, even the local church saying, how do we be the local church today for this community?
So this is interesting question, and right off the top of my head, so excuse me, are we John Wesley's church? Are we stewards, if you will, of the church John Wesley created in 17? Or are we the church that is supposed to live into the spirit of John Wesley's revival spirit, his ambitious spirit, his audastic at times? Is that and if you do that, then when the church changes, is it still John Wesley's church?
You see, that's an interesting question, because we quickly got rid of John Wesley as part of our work in the 18th and 19th century. We just now started to reclaim him as part of that. So we are trying to reclaim some of the Wesleyan heritage we have there. I see on the horizon we're going to be doing some more digging into Richard Allen and Francis Asbury's work as part of that early early Methodism in America sort of thing, because we teach a lot of John Wesley, but Francis Asbury has shaped so much of our structures. And Richard Allen is our first revolutionary in terms of we have to break away from that which is oppressing us as sort of that. And Richard Allen, I think, is sort of the ideal Methodist in the heart of Wesley, simply because he refused to be mistreated, but he also he's being trained as a doctor in a lot of ways during the yellow fever pandemic of Philadelphia. And even though he's getting Richard Allen, if you don't know, is the founder of the AME Church, was at the original Christmas conference and licensed to preach, but not allowed to vote because, racism as part of this. And yet he becomes the father of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which is in many ways more traditional in Wesley's vein than we are, because it rooted itself in training people to do the work of like medical work and preparing the dead and those sort of things. So living into that kind of fun stuff.
Yeah,
that's part of that. My students, if you take history with me, have to read him alongside of John Wesley.
Yeah, I find it really one of the really important things is that John Wesley did not just, like we said earlier, didn't just focus on people's like personal holiness, but also like people as a whole. And I think when you're considering focusing on people as a whole, it's just never going to be John Wesley's church for long. It's always going to eventually have to adapt into something new, something that John Wesley could have never seen coming. So it's Christ's church. It's a church that follows the movement of the Holy Spirit, that is willing to, to have that structure, because we are, we're focused on being a connectional church. And so we do need that structure, but also to have the willingness to kind of adapt that structure over time. So that we aren't, stuck in our old ways, but we are addressing the needs of everyday people in everyday circumstances. So, yeah.
And that was, we risked the sin, if you will, of committing that the church that John Wesley was trying not break away from, but was trying to revive. We risk going right back into that and doing the exact things that he had a problem with. And the answers then aren't the answers now. But the thoughts and the process could still be the same.
Yeah. I mean, that's that reality of what are we beholden to versus what do we act in the spirit of? I mean, I think that's that reality.
Or going back. Things like, John Wesley and the itinerancy. We've kind of gotten away from moving every, 4 to 5 years. And Wesley said, you probably have 4 years worth of stuff to say. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's that reality of, I think Wesley is trying to make it where we're not worshiping a pastor in a lot of ways. But he's also, more than that, trying to empower the lay people to be the true leaders of the church. Right. And while the pastor preacher may be the shepherd, it really needs to be the lay people who are doing the work of spreading the gospel in the community.
And that way they're a blessing to each other instead of just one way.
And John Wesley set it up where the lay people would be educated, providing resources.
Insisted on it, in fact, I would dare say.
Yeah. I mean, there's an expectation that as you're trained and led and guided, and that's why he has so many books and tracts that he's written or he's adapted for lay people to read.
Which was a fairly, I wouldn't say new, but it was a fairly new thing, to get regular, ordinary folk to get that level of devotion towards really learning this stuff, not just learning chapter verse.
Yeah, even his sermons on several occasions, he says were written for the lay audience as part of that, to not be academic, but to be lay oriented. Now, today, my students who have to outline them may say something different.
Well, sure.
He was trying to be accessible to the lay folk.
You got to read between the lines, kids. You got to.
And also, he's writing in 18th century English.
Right.
And we're reading English, and we're speaking 21st century American English.
Hey, a little bit of context helps the medicine go down.
Yeah,
but that's a part of the reason why the logo for Cokesbury is this guy riding a horse and reading a book, because how much John Wesley emphasized that continued education for pastors. I mean, it was like, while they didn't have audiobooks while they drove, so while they were riding
Wesley
from place to place,
loved an audiobook or a Kindle.
Oh my goodness!
Oh gosh, he'd devour it. He would have it all day long.
That and like Speechify, he'd be all over.
Oh
that
yeah,
stuff.
he'd be dictating. Holy cow!
Oh yeah, he would have written twice as much stuff.
I
as
would
he
have
had
never been able to read that much, John Wesley.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I mean, when I was in his house and I got to see his writing desk and reading and writing desk, it was basically a backwards chair where he could put his teacup or his lamp right there, or he didn't drink tea very often, but his cup and his lamp right there, and he could like sit with his propping his chest while he read and then while he wrote, so that he could rest himself as he continued. So he had a specially built chair.
All right, so just before we transition into our fan mail portion of today, Jonathan, anything else that was just really super interesting about your trip that you didn't get to? You talked about being in his pulpit.
I mean, so I'll just highlight two more things. I got to go into the church where Samuel Annesley was kicked out of.
Yes.
It was on the walking tour of Methodism. It was a lot of fun to go into.
Did they then kick you out?
No, but they had an Oliver Cromwell window in that church where because he got married in that church.
Nice.
So that's fun. I mean, England's one of those places that you can walk every 5 feet. There's a plaque telling you something historic happened here. Fine. Yes. So, but I think going into John Wesley's prayer room and into his pulpit were two very powerful experiences for me. I think that sort of reality that I could go and see the same space and likely the same little ottoman that he knelt on to pray in is just powerful. And then to stand at this in the pulpit that was built for him. Now they've lowered it some. He's no longer most of the preachers are a little taller than that as part of that. But to go into the church where he was where he had built his chapel he had built for him, that is now probably one of the most well attended Methodist churches in England. As part of that, those powerful experiences of seeing that and being in that place where like they had set it up where his glasses were sitting on the table, just simple casual things that this was a real person who had his life that he lived and this beautiful reality that he had built for him, and that they try to honor in his legacy.
That's amazing. That's fantastic.
And the graves.
The graves, yes. To be able to see Charles and John's graves and Susanna's grave, it's a weird little morbid celebration of like, this is these people. But the weirdest thing is John Wesley's grave is surrounded by like 1980s or 90s style skyscraper looking buildings, because
he's not in the Anglican church, right? Because he's not buried in the Anglican church, right?
Right. He's buried at his church, so his chapel. But at some point or another, London built up around these historic churches and historic cemeteries. So like there's a coffee shop down the street from the place where Susanna Wesley is buried. There's all these things built up around where John Wesley's church is. So it's this little cute little chapel in this bustling part of London now. To see that time has gone on past it, but we still honor the history that is there.
Yeah, there's a sermon in there.
Absolutely.
Core not changing, but everything changing around it.
Yeah.
What a pastor.
Very cool, John.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing that. So let's hop into our fan mail section. This week's Divine Query comes from Josh at Grace United Methodist Church. He says, "Dear Means of Grace podcast hosts, loved the sports episode, and I was sorry to see John's Florida Gators get crushed.
Unnecessary.
Crushed like that on their home opener. My question is, considering how tense and ultimately violent the relationship between Britain and America came to be, why did John Wesley care so much for America?" Who wants to take a stab at that one?
I mean, he has a whole thing where he's trying to get America to stop it.
Yeah.
I believe it's an earnest appeal to the American colonies.
It is.
I mean,
That's right, yeah.
Like, he does not want them to leave.
No,
but
desperately.
Desperately, and for lots of different reasons. Plus, he's loyal to the king. That's who he is. He likes the king. As much as the king, we know historically, is losing his mind as well. As part of that, John Wesley, I think he loves the American colonies for the same reason he loves anywhere he would send the church, whether it's Ireland or to Scotland or wherever, is because he wants to see the gospel spread, and wherever that gospel is being spread, the world be changed because of it. And he knows that he has this passion for spreading the gospel and changing the world. He continues to be anti-slavery his entire life, especially towards the end, where he's writing letters and trying to get Parliament to change things. Like, he's always about individuals changing, but he's beginning to see the need to change policy. So he wants to send people who are part of his work up to that to continue the work, to send people, and people are empowered to spread the gospel that transformed the world. It doesn't simply placate people.
He had in some of his writings, he had a hopefulness. And I think and this is shared by a lot of people, that time period, and of this unwavering hopefulness of the new world, which when now we look back at it and we think about Native Americans and how we think about a lot of different things, but at the time, I mean, we're talking about somebody who would have had access to Jonathan Winthrop's City Upon a Hill, or a model of Christian charity. Sorry, he'd say things like, "For we must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us, so that if we shall deal falsely with our God in this work that we have undertaken, and so cause him to withdraw his present help from us, we shall be made a story and a byword throughout the world." So he's there early on preaching about how this could be the new everything, this perfect place of Christian freedom and making it a truly Christian world. And John Wesley's listening to this stuff, and you can tell he is so into it. He tries to go to Georgia. I mean, he makes if y'all just go back and read, if you don't know the history of John Wesley in Georgia, his love for America shines through with how devoted he was in that mission of trying desperately to get there. John Wesley is just a soft spot for America, and like a lot of people at the time did, this unending hopefulness that they had for this new world, that it could be different. It could be a place of freedom and hope and of God that would be a city upon a hill. John Wesley would have had access to John Winthrop's, "For we must consider that we are a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us, so that if we shall deal falsely with our God in this work we've undertaken, and so cause him to withdraw his present help from us, we shall be made a story and a byword throughout the world." That this was a moment in history, in all of Christian history, to make it and do it right. And then you can see his heartbreak when the colonies decided to declare their independence. It wasn't just righteous anger, it was heartbreak. And I imagine he wasn't alone. But he did. He had this unending hope. And then the fact that he had those strong words about the revolution and then proceeded to help us build a church again, that's everything.
Yeah. Growing the church is all that mattered. Spreading the gospel and growing the kingdom.
You had unending hope. You have to have hope. Prevenient hope, if you will. I mean, it's just the hope that comes, right? The grace that comes before hope. You got to have it.
That's such an important thing. Yeah. Thank you, Josh. Absolutely. If you have other questions, do email us.
Please do. That's right. Send us an email.
Leave a comment. If you're watching us on YouTube, leave a comment or email us. We'd love to hear from you. Or if you're watching us on our Facebook pages, where we like to share the podcast as well. All right, let's head over to our strangely heartwarming section for today. John, you got that one?
Oh, our hearts are strangely warmed today. With schools back in session, United Methodists across Western North Carolina have resumed their weekly backpack ministries, which provide food for students across the conference who need a little extra nutritional support on the days schools are not open. One such group, the Backpack Crew at First UMC North Wilkesboro, packed hundreds of bags at the Samaritan Kitchen of Wilkes County this week, making sure students in their community will have enough food this weekend. First UMC North Wilkesboro is also ministering to the teachers at their local elementary school. The week before the school year began, the church hosted the elementary school teachers for breakfast and lunch, and 2 church members arranged vases and flowers and made bookmarks, which they gifted to the teachers. We are so grateful for teachers and administrators who have gone back to school to educate our young people. Thank you, First UMC North Wilkesboro, and all our UMC churches who are caring for students, teachers, and faculty this year.
I do love a backpack program. I think that's such a needed thing. And I know one year I was at a church and we got permission to deliver meals over the summer to students who are on the backpack programs. And that's really
so huge.
Nice that the churches could gather up and create things and drop off things for students over the summer, who we know that over the summer there's an issue that may come up where students may not get access to food, let alone any sort of nutritious food as part of that.
True.
So making sure we can provide.
Well, and not just that, I think just showing that the church cares for our teachers and for our students as well in general. I mean,
Yeah.
it hasn't been that long since we just mourned our last school shooting, and so we know that it's prevalent, and we know that our students and our teachers need our prayers and our assistance in more ways than one. So my hope, as we have our hearts strangely warmed by the news, this news about these backpack ministries and things like that, I hope that this flourishes into some more opportunities for us to partner with churches to be more supportive
and sometimes
to teachers and to children.
Sometimes just doing the thing will lead to something else. Some people say, well, why would I do that? So, well, getting involved in your community will lead to other things. John Wesley started getting out of the church and he got pulled into everything. You get out there and then that's where it is.
And it's very, I mean, it feels daunting, but it's really easy to go to school and say, hey, I would like to volunteer. Yeah. How can I get involved? And they're probably going to make you do a background check and go through a training, but they should.
That's important.
That's right.
They're like finding ways, like where are your gifts like? Maybe you're not a great tutor or you're not interested in doing a backpack program. Sometimes teachers just need somebody to file some stuff.
Or a kid to sit and eat lunch with.
Right. Or like I knew one school I worked with, they just wanted a 1 day a month. They had what they called duty-free lunch for teachers, where volunteers would come in. The school or somebody in the school would order food for the teachers, and they could go eat in the teachers' lounge without having to help students. And it was my job, or whoever else was volunteered, to do open packets and to make sure kids if they needed something extra, to make sure that they were enjoying lunch, but not enjoying it so much as to cause a huge mess. Normal, volunteering stuff, just talking to kids. Their kids are happy to overshare with you about their lives in the lunchroom.
And they need that. And so do you. That's the other thing is we need that too.
Yeah. So you never know how, the little you do or the little you can do ends up, maybe freeing up some time for a teacher to spend some extra one-on-one time with a student, or maybe you giving, lending your ear to a student who's just been going through a lot. You never know how much that's going to impact. So hopefully, in this edition's strangely heartwarming section, hopefully you've been inspired to do a little bit more. We want to thank everybody for joining us for this episode of The Means of Grace. We've walked alongside John Wesley on his journey to America through the trials of his mission to Georgia, and trust me, we can get into a lot more. But we talked a little bit about
go do your own reading. It's great.
Yes, do your own reading. Google it. We can learn from the ways that, like, even in failure, grace has a way of finding the path for us again. So if you're feeling unsure or discouraged, remember to follow the stirrings of your heart. Remember to follow the Holy Spirit, trusting that the grace of God will always guide us. Wesley didn't give up. He didn't allow his failures to hold him back. He kept going, and because of that, countless lives were transformed and are continuing to be transformed today as well. So you never know where your path will lead if you keep moving forward with faith and trusting in God. So thank you so much for tuning into the Means of Grace podcast today. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and share it with a friend. Heck, share it with a foe. Just share it with whoever. So for John, Jonathan, and myself, thank you. And until next time, keep following your heart and let grace be your guide. Peace out.